I'd been saving for months. This was supposed to be the ultimate getaway, a much-needed escape from the monotony of office work and gray skies. I booked a secluded cabin in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, a place so remote it didn't even show up on Google Maps. It was perfect. Or so I thought. The drive there was long but scenic. Rolling hills gave way to dense forests, and the hum of the city was replaced by the quiet rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of unseen birds. By the time I arrived, the sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and pink. The cabin stood at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by towering pines. It looked like something out of a postcard. Inside, the cabin was cozy, with a stone fireplace, worn leather furniture, and a kitchen stocked with all the essentials. A handwritten note on the counter welcomed me. "Enjoy your stay. Don't hesitate to call if you need anything. Mary." There was no cell service, but there was a landline, an ancient rotary phone mounted on the wall. It added to the rustic charm. That first night was uneventful. I built a fire, poured myself a glass of whiskey, and settled in with a book. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, a soothing backdrop to the crackling flames. I felt at peace, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. The next morning, I decided to explore the surrounding woods. I'd packed my hiking boots and a map I'd printed out, though it was rudimentary at best. The trails weren't marked, and after an hour of wandering, I realized I'd lost my way. It didn't bother me at first. The forest was beautiful, and I figured I could retrace my steps. But as the hours passed, the sun climbed higher, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. At first, it was subtle. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves where there shouldn't have been. I told myself it was just wildlife, a deer or a raccoon. But then I found the footprints. They were fresh, pressed into the soft earth, and they weren't mine. Barefoot, human, and large enough to send a chill down my spine. I called out, my voice sounding small against the vastness of the forest. No reply. I quickened my pace, heading in what I hoped was the direction of the cabin. The woods seemed to close in around me, the trees standing taller, their branches entwining overhead. The air grew cooler, and the light dimmed. My breath came in shallow gasps, and my heart pounded, as if it were trying to escape my chest. When I finally stumbled back onto the dirt road, relief washed over me. The cabin was just up ahead, its familiar shape a beacon of safety. But as I approached, I noticed something was off. The front door was ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze. I was certain I'd locked it. Inside, everything appeared untouched at first glance. My bag was where I'd left it, the book still open on the armrest of the chair. But the back door, which led to the porch, was wide open. And on the kitchen counter next to Mary's note was a single muddy handprint. Panic set in. I grabbed the nearest object I could use as a weapon, a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, and searched the cabin. Room by room, closet by closet, even under the bed. Nothing. Whoever had been there was gone. But they'd been inside, and they'd left the back door open as if to say, "I can come and go as I please." That night I barely slept. I locked every door and window, dragged the armchair in front of the front door, and sat there with the poker in hand. The forest was alive with sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of some nocturnal animal. But just as I began to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing, I heard it. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and they circled the cabin. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tensed. The footsteps stopped at the front door. A shadow passed by the window, too large to be an animal. Then came the knock. It was soft at first, almost polite. But when I didn't respond, it grew louder, more insistent. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. No answer. The knocking stopped, replaced by a heavy silence that was somehow worse. Hours passed before I dared to move. When dawn broke, I ventured outside. There were no footprints, no signs anyone had been there. But nailed to the front door was a small wooden figurine, crudely carved to resemble a human figure. It was smeared with what looked like blood. I didn't wait to find out more. I threw my belongings into the car and sped down the dirt road, the cabin shrinking in my rearview mirror. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, where I checked into a motel and called the local sheriff. They promised to investigate, but said the cabin had a reputation. Stories of strange occurrences, disappearances. I hadn't been the first. I never went back to the cabin, and I never found out who or what was out there in the woods. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear that knock in my dreams, and I wake up drenched in sweat. The memory as vivid as the day it happened. The mountains might be beautiful, but they're also a place where things go unnoticed, and some things are better left unseen. I always thought vacations were a time to escape reality, recharge, and collect memories worth cherishing. My trip to the mountains, however, turned into a waking nightmare, one I'll never escape. It began innocently enough. I rented a secluded cabin deep in the Rockies, a place where I could disconnect from the chaos of my life. The brochure promised tranquility, a cozy wooden retreat surrounded by endless pine trees and a shimmering lake within walking distance. It was exactly what I needed. The drive up was uneventful, though the road grew narrower and more winding as I ascended. By the time I arrived, it was late afternoon, and the setting sun cast long, golden shadows over the landscape. The cabin looked just like the pictures, maybe even better. It had a rustic charm, a stone chimney, a wraparound porch, and windows that reflected the orange-pink hues of the sky. I felt an immediate sense of calm. That night, after unpacking, I decided to take a short hike down to the lake. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. As I reached the water's edge, I saw something peculiar. An old wooden rowboat tethered to a rotting dock. It wasn't in the brochure, and it looked out of place, weathered and abandoned. The oars were missing, and the boat seemed like it hadn't been used in years. For reasons I couldn't explain, I felt a chill creep down my spine. Brushing off the unease, I returned to the cabin and lit a fire. The crackling logs and warmth filled the room, and I poured myself a glass of wine. As I sank into the worn leather armchair, I noticed a journal on the coffee table. It was old, with a cracked leather cover, and I assumed it belonged to a previous guest. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The first few entries were mundane, descriptions of hikes, fishing trips, and wildlife sightings. But as I flipped further, the tone shifted. One entry caught my eye. Something's wrong here. The nights feel alive. I keep hearing noises outside like whispers carried on the wind. Last night, I saw movement in the trees. I'm not sure I'm alone. I laughed nervously and closed the journal, telling myself it was just someone's attempt at creative writing. Still, an uneasy feeling settled over me. I decided to call it a night and headed to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the wind outside made my heart race. I told myself it was just my imagination, fueled by the eerie journal entry. Around 3 a.m., I woke abruptly. The room was deathly silent, the kind of quiet that's almost suffocating. I lay there, straining my ears when I heard it. Faint footsteps on the porch. My breath caught in my throat. I told myself it was an animal, a raccoon or maybe a stray dog. But then came the knock. It was soft, almost hesitant, but deliberate. 3 slow, measured taps on the wooden door. I froze, my mind racing. Who could possibly be out here in the middle of nowhere? I didn't move, didn't breathe. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. When no further sounds came, I mustered the courage to get up and peek through the curtains. The porch was empty. The moon cast an eerie glow, illuminating the wooden planks and the steps leading down to the dirt path. There was no sign of anyone. Shaking, I double-checked the locks and grabbed a fireplace poker before retreating to the bedroom. Sleep was out of the question. The next morning, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe I'd dreamed it. Exhaustion could play tricks on the mind. I decided to distract myself with a hike. As I stepped outside, I froze. In the dirt just beyond the porch, steps were footprints. Barefoot, human footprints. They led from the forest to my door and then back into the trees. My stomach churned. I wanted to leave, but the idea of driving down that treacherous mountain road with so little sleep felt equally terrifying. Instead, I spent the day trying to shake the paranoia, telling myself it was probably some local playing a prank. That evening, I made sure every door and window was locked before settling in. I tried to read, but my eyes kept darting to the windows. The shadows outside seemed to move, though I knew it was just the flickering firelight. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I dozed off on the couch. I woke to the sound of the back door creaking open. My blood ran cold. I hadn't imagined it. The door was swinging slowly, the wind whistling through the gap. I grabbed the poker and approached, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. As I reached the door, I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the tree line. They were impossibly still, their silhouette blending with the shadows of the forest. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. No response. The figure didn't move. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands trembling. I wanted to call for help, but realized my phone had no signal out here. Panic set in. I felt trapped, a prey caught in a predator's territory. The rest of the night passed in a blur of terror. I sat by the fire, clutching the poker, jumping at every noise. By dawn, the figure was gone, but I knew I couldn't stay another night. I packed hastily, barely pausing to eat, and threw my bags into the car. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The cabin shrank in the distance, but just before it disappeared from view, I saw them. The figure stood on the porch, watching me leave. Their face was obscured, but I could feel their gaze, cold and unrelenting. I never reported what happened. Who would believe me? To this day, I don't know who or what it was. But sometimes, late at night, I dream of that figure. And when I wake, I'm certain I can still hear those soft, deliberate knocks on my door. I had been looking forward to this vacation for months. A solo trip to unwind, disconnect, and maybe find myself again. Life had been chaotic. Too many late nights at the office, a breakup that left me raw, and a constant hum of anxiety that never seemed to fade. So, when I found a remote cabin rental deep in the Appalachian Mountains, it felt perfect. No Wi-Fi, no cell service. Just me, the trees, and the silence. The drive up was uneventful, though the roads grew narrower and rougher the closer I got. The last stretch wasn't even paved, just gravel and dirt winding up a steep hill. When I finally arrived, the cabin was exactly as advertised, rustic, isolated, and surrounded by dense forest. The nearest neighbor was miles away, just the way I wanted it. The first night was peaceful. I made a fire, read a book, and fell asleep to the sound of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves outside. It was the kind of quiet that feels alive, almost comforting. But by the second night, the quiet started to feel different. I couldn't quite place it, but something felt off. It was around midnight when I heard the first sound. A faint knocking, slow and deliberate. I froze, straining to listen. It seemed to come from the front porch. My logical brain told me it was probably a branch tapping against the cabin, but something deeper, more primal, told me to stay still. Then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was at the door. I grabbed the flashlight I'd brought and crept to the window, careful to stay out of sight. Peeking through the corner of the curtain, I scanned the porch. Nothing. Just the empty wooden planks and the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the trees. My heart was pounding, but I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. The next morning I found footprints in the dirt outside the cabin. Barefoot, human-like, but wrong. The toes were too long, the heel too narrow. They led from the edge of the forest to the porch and then back into the woods. I told myself it was probably just an animal, though I'd never seen tracks like that before. I spent the day hiking, trying to shake the unease. By the time I returned to the cabin, the sun was setting, and the shadows seemed to stretch a little farther than usual. I locked the door, bolted the windows, and made sure the fire was blazing. Whatever had been out there the night before wasn't getting in, or so I thought. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of breathing, not my own. This was deeper, raspier, and coming from somewhere inside the cabin. My chest tightened as I reached for the flashlight on the nightstand. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the small room. Nothing. The door was still bolted, the windows intact. But the breathing continued, slow and deliberate, like it was savoring the moment. "Who's there?" My voice cracked as I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. The breathing stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. I didn't dare move, my ears straining for any hint of sound. Then, from the corner of the room, I heard it. A whisper. Low, guttural, and spoken in a language I didn't understand. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second I thought I saw a figure. Tall, shadowy, with limbs that seemed too long, too thin. And then it was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When the first light of dawn broke, I packed my things and decided to leave. Vacation be damned. I wasn't staying another night. But as I loaded my bags into the car, I noticed something on the porch. A small carved figure made of twigs and string, like some kind of primitive doll. It hadn't been there before. My hands shook as I picked it up, a chill running down my spine. That's when I noticed the scratches on the doorframe. They hadn't been there the day before. I drove down the mountain as fast as the gravel road would allow, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. Every hair on my neck stood on end, convinced that if I looked back, I'd see something, or someone, watching me. Even now, back home and surrounded by the noise of the city, I can't shake the feeling that I brought something back with me. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the faintest knock on my apartment door. Knock. Knock. Knock.